saw this coming, not after two brutal beatdowns, not after a 76-minute demolition at Queen's Club, and certainly not after months of watching one teenager dominate the head-to-head against rising Filipina star Alex Eala. But on the biggest tennis stage in the world, in front of 23,000 roaring fans at Arthur Ashe Stadium, everything suddenly changed. Alex Eala stepped onto the court for the exhibition match carrying an 0-2 record against her close friend Iva Jovic, a record that had followed her throughout the summer like a psychological barrier she simply could not break, no matter how hard she fought. Yet on the very night when few expected it, Alex finally shattered that wall. What unfolded at the Stars of the Open was more than just an exhibition match. It was the collision of friendship, rivalry, pressure, and redemption on one of tennis's most iconic stages, and the result could ultimately mean far more than a single scoreline. To understand why this victory hit so hard, you have to go back to where this rivalry first started to sting. Roland Garros in May 2026. Alex Eala stepped onto the clay to face Iva Jovic, an 18-year-old American who was ranked 19th in the world at the time. Young, fearless, and clearly comfortable under the spotlight, Jovic gave Alex no room to settle, winning 6-4, 6-2 and immediately taking the first chapter of their rivalry in her favor. But what made the matchup far more complicated than a typical tennis rivalry was the relationship between the two players. Jovic and Alex weren't strangers battling from opposite sides of the tour. They were genuine friends who had known each other since 2022, when they first crossed paths at the US Open Juniors, a tournament Alex ultimately won in the girls' singles competition. Their friendship only grew stronger from there. They teamed up in doubles at major events such as Indian Wells and the ASB Classic, explored new cities together, shared dinners with other young players on tour, and built a bond away from the court that made their battles on it even more personal. This wasn't manufactured tennis drama. It was a real friendship being tested by real competition. This was a genuine bond between two competitors who truly liked and respected each other, which somehow made every defeat hurt just a little more. After the French Open loss, Alex didn't make excuses. Instead, she was remarkably honest about why facing her friend was so mentally challenging. It wasn't fear, nerves, or intimidation. It was the unusual mental battle of stepping onto the court against someone who was both a close friend and an intense competitor, and for those 2 hours, the competition had to come first. Alex explained that they had become comfortable with this dynamic and approached each matchup professionally, preparing for each other just as they would for any other opponent, regardless of the surface or tournament. Jovic shared a similar perspective, noting that after playing so much doubles together, the two knew each other's tendencies almost perfectly. There were no real secrets, no easy surprises, and no hidden weaknesses either player could suddenly expose. In the end, Jovic said, the match simply came down to who could execute their game plan better on that particular day, and that day belonged to Jovic. But for Alex, things were about to get even tougher. Fast forward to June 10th at Queen's Club in London, and what should have been a chance to bounce back quickly turned into an even more one-sided defeat. The scoreline looked almost identical to the French Open, 6-2, 6-2, but the way Alex Eala lost was somehow even more painful. This wasn't a competitive match that slipped away in the final moments. It was complete control from beginning to end, with Jovic finishing the job in just 76 minutes. Consider that for a moment, only 76 minutes to dismantle a player who had entered the tournament riding a 5-match winning streak on grass. Jovic didn't simply defeat Alex that day. She stopped her momentum, ended her winning streak, and sent a statement that would linger throughout Alex's grass court season. The statistics showed just how dominant the performance was. Jovic produced 26 winners to Alex's 12, while committing only 9 unforced errors compared with Alex's 19. Her forehand quality was reportedly rated at an outstanding 9. 5 out of 10, almost video game levels of consistency when the tournament average was around 6. 5. She converted 5 break points, was broken just once, and won a huge 81% of her first serve points, leaving Alex struggling to find a response. For Alex, it was another painful reminder that beating her close friend was going to require something much different the next time they met. And in her post-match comments, she began to explain just how difficult that challenge had become. Jovic didn't shy away from acknowledging how well she had played. She admitted that the confidence she carried from their earlier meeting at Roland Garros gave her a real advantage heading into the rematch because she already understood exactly what to expect from Alex's game. She also spoke about feeling confident during that part of the season, especially on a surface where her tennis was clicking. Losing to someone once is difficult, but losing twice in a row, and in increasingly dominant fashion, to someone who is also one of your closest friends on tour is a completely different challenge. Jovic made it clear that she deeply respected Alex, both as a person and as a competitor, and she even predicted that the two would face each other many more times in the future, adding that Alex would eventually get her back a few times. That's simply how tennis works, she suggested. But for a competitor sitting at 0-2, knowing that the gap seemed to grow wider with every meeting, that philosophy was easier said than accepted. Even after the second painful defeat, however, Alex displayed something that deserved just as much attention as the result itself: grace. She didn't sulk, make excuses, or shift blame. After the French Open loss, she praised Jovic's performance, said she was genuinely proud of how far her friend had come, and made it clear that she was taking the setback in stride. That response revealed something important about the mental foundation Alex was building, even when the results weren't going her way. Because pressure in tennis doesn't always come from rankings, prize money, or expectations. Sometimes the heaviest burden is in 0-2 record against someone you genuinely care about, a puzzle you can't solve no matter how many hours you spend studying it. That weight followed Alex through the rest of the summer and all the way to New York, to the one stage where everything becomes bigger, louder, and more meaningful, the US Open. But before getting to the redemption, it's important to understand the context, because the two players were arriving at this moment with very different public narratives, even if their head-to-head record told a completely different story. At 21 years old, Alex had emerged as one of the most exciting breakout stars in tennis, climbing into the world's top 30 and becoming the highest-ranked Filipino player in WTA history, a milestone that carried significance far beyond the sport itself. In a country where tennis superstars at this level are exceptionally rare, Alex's rise carried enormous significance. Jovic, meanwhile, was building an impressive story of her own. At just 18 years old, she had become the youngest player inside the WTA's top 20 and had risen to become the fourth-ranked American woman on tour. Two young stars, two national storylines, and one shared rivalry that had repeatedly ended in frustration for Alex. So when the pairings for the stars of the Open were announced, tennis fans immediately understood what they were seeing. This wasn't simply another exhibition match tucked into a week of promotional events. It was the third chapter of a rivalry that desperately needed a different ending. Now in its fourth consecutive year and presented by Chase, the stars of the Open had become one of the signature attractions of US Open Fan Week, combining entertainment with a charitable mission. This year's lineup featured four of the sport's most exciting young players: Alex Eala, Joao Fonseca, Iva Jovic, and Lerner Ting, names that fans are likely to hear much more about in the years ahead. Tickets started at just $30, with a portion of the proceeds benefiting the USTA Foundation, the sport's national charitable arm. The foundation supports the National Junior Tennis and Learning Network, which includes more than 270 organizations providing young people in underserved communities with access to tennis, academic assistance, and mentorship. Collectively, the network reaches more than 233,000 young people, helping them develop skills and confidence that extend far beyond the tennis court. Alex, who has repeatedly used her growing platform to give back, was a natural fit for an event built around that mission. But once the first ball was struck, the charity aspect faded into the background and the match became deeply personal. There were no ranking points at stake, no tournament implications, and no effect on the official standings. On paper, it was simply an exhibition, low stakes but high entertainment. Emotionally, however, it represented something much bigger for Alex. An opportunity to finally solve the puzzle that had frustrated her for months, to prove that she could compete with a player who had beaten her twice without much resistance, and to enter the US Open with her confidence restored rather than carrying the psychological weight of an 0-2 record. And there was something almost poetic about the setting. Arthur Ashe Stadium, the largest tennis stadium in the world, was packed with roughly 23,000 fans, many of them waving Filipino flags and fully aware of the storyline unfolding before them. This wasn't Roland Garros. This wasn't Queen's Club. This was the biggest stage in tennis, and Alex was about to discover whether this stage could finally work in her favor. Before the match, Jovic had actually spoken about wanting their future meetings to take place on an even bigger competitive stage. After their Queen's Club encounter, she said she hoped that as their rankings continued to rise, they would eventually meet deeper in major tournaments, in semifinals or finals, where the result would carry real consequences alongside the storyline. That comment revealed just how much potential Jovic believed this rivalry had, and perhaps neither player realized at the time just how quickly the next chapter would arrive. Jovic wasn't worried about Alex catching up. If anything, she seemed to be looking much further ahead, imagining a future where their rivalry would unfold on center court at Grand Slam tournaments, deep into the draw, with semifinals, finals, and real stakes attached. But before that future could arrive, there was unfinished business waiting for both of them at Arthur Ashe Stadium. When the match finally began, the atmosphere inside the packed stadium was electric. Roughly 23,000 fans watched in anticipation as two close friends prepared to put their off-court relationship aside and become competitors once again. From the opening exchanges, however, something immediately felt different. Alex came out aggressively, positioning herself on the baseline and dictating the rallies from the very first points. This wasn't the hesitant, searching version of Alex that had appeared at Roland Garros or Queen's Club. She looked like a player who had spent the weeks since those defeats studying exactly what went wrong and identifying what needed to change. Across the net, something equally unexpected was unfolding. Jovic, who had looked almost untouchable during their previous meeting, suddenly appeared uncharacteristically error-prone. The same forehand that had earned an extraordinary 9.5 out of 10 quality rating at Queen's Club wasn't finding the same rhythm, and Alex was ready to take advantage. The same composure that had carried Jovic through that 6-2, 6-2 demolition at Queen's Club simply wasn't there when it mattered most. Alex's movement was sharp, her shot selection was precise, and with every point she won, the energy inside Arthur Ashe Stadium seemed to rise alongside her confidence. Filipino flags waved throughout the stands whenever she held serve, and the noise grew louder as the crowd began to realize that something special might actually be happening. Alex took the first set, and if that already felt like a small victory after two brutally one-sided defeats, what happened next transformed the night into something much bigger. The second set followed a remarkably similar pattern, with Alex controlling the tempo while Jovic struggled to find the answers that had come so naturally in their previous meetings. Then came the final point, and the scoreboard displayed something that would have seemed almost impossible before the night began. Alex had finally beaten Iva Jovic. The eruption inside Arthur Ashe Stadium was immediate and deafening. The same passionate energy that had followed Alex throughout her remarkable summer run exploded across the world's biggest tennis venue as Filipino fans stood, waved their flags, and chanted her name. But this wasn't simply about winning an exhibition match. It was about breaking a psychological narrative that had been building for months. Alex had entered the contest with an 0-2 record against her friend, having lost both previous meetings in straight sets and spending much of the season searching for a solution to a puzzle that seemed impossible to solve. On the biggest stage she had played on so far, in front of one of the largest crowds of her career, she finally found the answer. The emotional arc was remarkable because this rivalry had never been built on hostility or bad blood. It was built on genuine friendship, mutual respect, and the complicated reality of professional sport, where someone you care about away from the court can instantly become your toughest opponent once the match begins. Jovic had summed up that dynamic perfectly after their Queen's Club meeting, saying that she wanted Alex to win every match she played, except, naturally, when they faced each other. Once they stepped onto the court, they were simply competitors. Nothing personal, nothing complicated. Friendship paused, competition activated, and when the match ended, there were no hard feelings regardless of the result. For Alex, however, the result carried enormous emotional significance, even if she didn't show it beforehand. And the timing could hardly have been more important. This victory came just as she was preparing to enter the most significant tournament of her season, the US Open, at a career-high world number 18 ranking, officially making her the highest-ranked Filipino tennis player in history. The scale of her rise becomes even clearer when you remember that only a year earlier, Alex was still fighting through qualifying rounds simply to earn places in major main draws. Now she was preparing to receive her first ever seeding in the US Open women's singles draw. That wasn't a minor improvement. It represented a complete transformation in her position within the sport. More importantly, it was happening at the exact moment when the tennis world and fans around the globe were beginning to pay much closer attention to her. Suddenly, that victory over Jovic looked less like an exhibition footnote and much more like a potential turning point. Entering a Grand Slam with a 2-match losing streak against a rival, even a close friend, can create a quiet psychological weight that follows a player into every practice session, warm-up, and pre-match routine. Walking into that Grand Slam instead with a statement victory on one of tennis's biggest stages, in front of a massive home crowd and thousands of passionate Filipino supporters, sends an entirely different message. It tells Alex, and everyone watching, that the puzzle is no longer unsolvable, that the defeats of the summer don't define her, and that when the biggest moments arrive, she is capable of rewriting the story. Alex is now arriving at the US Open with something far more valuable than simply a win, real momentum instead of lingering doubt. Still, it's important to be clear about exactly what this victory was and what it wasn't, because context matters. This was an exhibition match, meaning there were no ranking points at stake, no direct impact on the WTA standings, and no influence on where Alex or Jovic will be seeded or drawn in future tournaments. In fact, based on Jovic's own comments about hoping to meet Alex deeper in major tournament draws, this rivalry is far from finished. It may only be entering its most meaningful chapter. But psychologically and emotionally, and in terms of competitive confidence heading into the biggest stretch of Alex's season, the victory could prove extremely valuable.